Alright, so you can see that I've already done some construction. I cut out the center part of this aluminum can. I got it off of Amazon, pretty cheap. I think it was like 30 bucks or so. I made a template with, after I cut out the hole, I made a template with a cereal box. Shaped it to the inside so that I know how big to make the Lexan. So I had a little bit of Lexan left over from another project, and I used the template, traced it on there, cut it out with a jigsaw just like I did the aluminum itself. Fairly easy. I love keeping extra cardboard around just for this sort of thing, making templates. It's so much easier to make a pattern to be 100% sure, especially when you've only got a little bit left and you don't have any extra, which is often the case for me. So you can see the Lexan fits in there nicely. So after I cut it out, I just kind of go through and clean up the edges. It tends to get a little sharp. I just got a file here. And aluminum, you know, is pretty easy to work with, pretty easy to shape. So if you do mess up, a nice file can clean things up. So I make even increments because I'm going to pop rivet that Lexan in there. So making even graduation marks using my ruler. And while I'm at it, and I remember, I'm putting a little marker on the edge so that I have this thing keyed. So I remember to put it back in the right direction, the correct orientation. So I'm taking my calipers here and I'm figuring out how far from the edge I need to make the rivet holes. And that way I can go to the graduation marks I've already made and kind of evenly mark these guys. As you can see, I don't even have my calipers on. I just figured out kind of a rough distance I like, and then I'm just going through and using that to mark. I do that a lot. Use my calipers to, I know you can kind of scrape and mark, but I don't like doing that. I usually just use a Sharpie. So here you can see I'm putting a little divot in where I'm gonna drill this metal. Any of you guys that have done any metal drilling knows that the bit likes to walk around if you don't have a little dent where you need it to. This is just a nail set, so it's not even the right equipment, but it gets the job done. Then I'm screwing in that wood in my tool holder there because I'm about to put some holes in some aluminum. I think it's cool the drill bit's actually going, but at the frame rate and the speed I have it going, you can't see it moving, which is kind of neat. It's sort of like magic's putting holes in this stuff. So I go through and I pre-drill the metal all the way around. I try and not do it with the Lexan in there because I don't want to screw anything up, don't want to scratch anything. As you can see, I've got all of the holes around. Now I put the Lexan in and I'm just following the pre-existing holes that I've already got in there. Makes it nice and simple. And that Lexan drills quite easily, but it is extremely tough. Way tougher than just standard polycarbonate plexiglass that I've used in the past. So now that I've got all my holes done, I'll move on to the next step. And the edges don't have to be perfect inside. I think you kind of see that they're a little wonky. It's all invisible, right? It's all hidden on the inside. So I'm going to slide the rivets in there and blop them in place with just a hand pop rivet gun in a minute. But first I'm going to go to the tailgate of the Jeep and I'm figuring out how big to make the bracket. So here's a trick I use. I put a piece of tape on there, just masking tape, and I write down my measurements as I go. So I'm figuring out how big to make the bracket, and then I'm figuring out how big the bolt is so I know how big of the holes I need to make in said bracket. And then now that I've got that on my tape, I transfer that over to my work table, and then I transfer all those marks over to my, what is this? I think it's a quarter inch piece of steel. So I'm going to go through, transfer my measurements across using a square. Highly recommend a square. Makes things so much simpler. Get my calipers out. I figure out the thickness of this guy, and then I'm going to figure out half the distance. Again, just make note of all your calculations as you go. And I'm finding my halfway points, verifying them, double checking, cleaning them up. Now I'm going to come back with my nail set, and I'm going to put a divot in these guys as well. Again, I'm not a big fan of drilling steel. It always takes forever. So here I'm just using a round object to round off the corners. I was thinking I could make it square, but then I thought, you know, it might maybe look a little nicer if I kind of rounded them off. So it gives me a guide. Here's my junky work table with my junky vise, equally junky vise, I guess. And I'm sure you sense a pattern there. The Chicago Electric tools. It's a lot of Harbor Freight cheapo stuff. But as often as I use this kit, I mean, it's fine. It's not going to hurt anything. So I get this bar cut. Now it's time to trim the tops. There you go. I know from this angle you can't actually see the marks, but I have those rounded marks. I'm going to cut them off at sort of like 45-degree angles. And now I'm going to switch tools. I'm going to go over to the angle grinder. And I'm going to shape those dudes up. Just kind of rounding them off. Getting them pretty close. I'm taking my time. Again, with this, you don't have to rush. The steel doesn't get eaten away. Rather, it doesn't eat away very fast whenever you're using this stuff, which is kind of good. But you still want to be careful and just not put any big major gouges in there. You don't want to get too wild with it. And I often come back and clean things up with a hand file. Again, you can do a little bit of final shaping. It just takes longer. But really just cleaning up those edges, getting kind of the burrs off, making sure it's nice and smooth. Right? If it's going to scratch you, the likelihood that it'll catch on things is pretty high. As you can see, I've got it kind of rounded off. And I'll continue to smooth it just a tad here in a minute. So, back to the drill press. I'm now drilling out this steel, pre-drilling it with a smaller diameter drill bit, and I'm going to come back with a larger one here in a second. And it's funny, the smell of that reminds me of my father-in-law. He always smells like oil. But here you see, switch to the larger bit. I actually have like kind of a cardboard box underneath this. I try and catch as many shavings as I can because this is actually in my workroom. So I use this for a lot of other things. So I really don't like drilling metal in here, but it's the only drill press I have. So there you go. So there's the bar finished. The holes, they need a little bit of deburring, it looks like, but and they need to get some of the oil off, but I'll do that here in a minute. So now we're moving back to the enclosure itself. Marking off, you see that little dot? I held it up where my wife wanted it because this is her Jeep, and I just put a little Sharpie mark to denote where that bracket here, this mounting bracket, needed to go. So again, I try and be as precise as I can. Use the square, make a line across, get everything lined up. Again, I'll use the square to kind of straighten that dude up. Get him on there. And then Sharpie my holes. I'll come back with a nail set again here in a second. There you go. Keep that drill bit from walking. Christopher Walken. There you go. Hole number 1. And had I thought about it, I would have only put one hole in. But I wasn't thinking about it, which is what happens when I just start doing stuff sometimes. So here I'm attaching the bracket to one side. So had I been thinking, I would have put one hole, attached the bracket in one side, and then use the bracket itself to drill out the other. You see here I went ahead and did it and cleaned up the hole. You saw a little bit of metal came off, so it wasn't perfect before. But get that guy screwed on there for reference. As you can see, those bolt heads are sticking out kind of big on the backside. In a minute, I'm going to shave those down just so that I don't have to put as big a spacer between the tailgate and the light. So here I'm taking off those top bolts, attaching it back on here. I'm getting ready to drill the holes at the bottom that the wires are going to go through into the tailgate. So I really just go through the aluminum, and I put kind of a divot on the steel plate there where it's going to go, and then I finish it off. That drill I've had since I was 13, I think. It was my first power tool. Still kicking. So now I'm going to take the aluminum, I'm going to scuff it up. I think I got some 220 here. Really, you're just giving a surface for paint to adhere to. Now I'm taking acetone and I'm cleaning up all the parts. They were all dirty. The steel bracket itself still has oil on it from when I drilled it. So you want to get all that stuff nice and clean. Get it all cleaned up. Now I'm taking just a little bit of wire, kind of, what is that, electrical fence wire, and I'm attaching it to all the parts so that I can hang them up. Now I'm using self-etching primer. I did a little research, and whenever you're priming metals, the self-etching is what you're apparently shooting for, especially with aluminums. I'm not sure why. Maybe it eats into it a little bit, but it did a tremendous job on this stuff, so I'm going to continue to do it. You can see there's the primed part. It's kind of a green. I really didn't care if it's green, gray, whatever. It was going to end up being black. Here's the acrylic enamel paint I'm using to coat the parts. And I'm doing light dustings. I'm doing multiple coats. I think I did 3 coats on each one of these with primer and this stuff. And then eventually I came back with a clear coat as well to just harden it up a little bit. I've never painted anything and stuck it on a vehicle, so I wasn't sure how far to go with it. So I went ahead and actually clear coated it as well. So here's the bolts that are going in that bracket. And again, I wanted them to be kind of shaved down. I wanted them to be as unobtrusive as possible on the back so that I could keep that light as close to the back of the tailgate as possible. Because, you know, I didn't want these things just rubbing on there. The vibrations of the vehicle, I think, would eventually start wearing through the paint. I just didn't want to screw up that bracket. After I shave those guys down, I come back with a file and I just kind of square everything back up. I took them down to, I don't know, maybe 1/8 of an inch, something like that. They're pretty thin, as you can see. It's really just enough to get some pliers to bite onto them. So now that the parts are painted, I'm putting the bracket on for good. Just a big flat washer, then lock washer on there. I didn't have any ratchets in my room, and I was too lazy to walk to the garage, so I just used pliers. Now I'm using a little bit of silicone. And this is to weatherproof the housing. I didn't want any rain kind of coming in through the front of this thing, or through the seal around it. There's actually a foam seal that I put on there that squeezes it shut. As you can see, there's the plexi. I pull the clear film off the front and back. This is the last time it's going to be clean. It gets dirty really quick. So I just put the pop rivets in there and do what pop rivets do best. Put them in place, and there it is. It's completed on the front, at least. Now I'm going through and cleaning up the excess silicone. It got a little funky. Some of it squeezed out in the front. I'm just making sure it gets nice and clean. So here's the LED strip. It's 12 volt LED strip, so I didn't actually have to do any boosting. I didn't have to do any dampening down. I've used strip lights for a long time. I usually use WS2812 NeoPixels. They're individually addressable, but for this project I just wanted you hit the brake pedal, the lights immediately come on, no delay in between. So here I just kind of roughly fill out the shape, and then I just start cutting a whole bunch to match. This stuff actually has kind of a silicone cover over it, so it sort of weatherproofs. Well, I mean, not sort of, it absolutely weatherproofs the strips themselves. They also have an adhesive backing, which I generally don't use. So you can see it's kind of a pain in the butt because I'm customizing these guys. So they all have pads every inch or so. So it's points where you can cut them and then solder to them. And it is a pain in the butt to get all those off, but eventually it gets done, right? So masking tape's your friend. Once you get them lined up in there the way you want them, you just tape them all together, and it makes it so much easier to pull these jokers out. All in one big mat. So now I can start the process of tinning all the leads. That's just where you take solder and you attach it to the leads. I also tin all of the wires before I attempt to attach them. It makes everything so much simpler. I've built lots of different things with these light strips, and this is by far the easiest way to get it done. So now I go through and I'm actually soldering on the tinned leads. And so what I'll really start doing is I'm using stranded Cat 5e, or actually this is stranded Cat 5e. And after I do the positive lead, I go through and test. Every step of the way, you want to test your lights, and test your lights, and then test your lights some more. I've done this enough times to where you run into failures, and you want to catch those guys ahead of time. So as you can see, the wires end up being just one continuous strand. I just kind of heat it up. So I'll take my strippers and I'll just kind of eat away the wire a little bit in the middle part, and then I'll use the soldering iron's heat to make the plastic shrink around, and then I just solder on. So now I'm about to protect these leads, and so I put down some masking tape on my board here. This is a little Jimmy DiResta trick I learned a million years ago from watching his videos. With the masking tape on the table to mix your glue, here I'm actually... So what he does is he takes a piece of masking tape or painter's tape, and he puts it down and he mixes up. My twist is I use a popsicle stick. You saw I cut the end off and then I put it at an angle. It makes it easy to mix on the board, or rather on the tape, and then actually like scrape off additional. And it makes a really good applicator. Plus you don't waste the whole thing. You only get glue on the last inch of it, so then you can cut it off there and just continue to use it. Again, test and then test some more. So now for the logo that's going to be inside, my wife uses her Cricut software to make her Jeep hand, or what is this thing called, a Jeep wave. Here's the Cricut doing its job. It doesn't nearly go this fast. Obviously I sped this up, but it does a pretty incredible job of cutting stuff out, especially in vinyl. Here's her, I think it's called weeding it. So it's where you peel off all the parts of the vinyl you don't want. Sorry about the contrast there. So you can see she's got some dental tools where she picks all that stuff off, cleans things up. Excellent. So now we're using what's called transfer paper. So you stick it over the top, and the decal, the vinyl will adhere to that, and you can peel it off the base layer so that you can then move it like a sticker. So what I'm doing here is I'm lining up the picture through there, and I'm using more painter's tape to attach it onto the cover right where I want it. You know, get it just perfect. First, you're going to clean up the glass one last time. Peel off the sticker backing so you can see the transfer paper still there, holding the vinyl in place, and then you just get that joker on there as best you can. Rub it in real good, try and get all the bubbles out. But honestly, this project, the sticker's made to look rough and tumble, so even if you didn't do a great job, it's still going to look good. Now you peel the transfer paper off, clean up any bubbles, any little edges, and there you have it. Again, it's not going to look this pristine for long. So honestly, the backing, or rather the sticker there, if we put it on the lights right now, it would look terrible because you would be able to see all that stuff through. So we're going to have to do something in a minute to take care of it. Here's that adhesive backing. I'm peeling off the protective paper backing on these strips. So I'm going to use some additional adhesive, right? Because in the heat of the summer, this stuff's not going to just stick on its own. And also the ends are exposed. You're putting them in a metal enclosure, so I'm using liquid electrical tape to cover up all the exposed ends. There is kind of a rubberized adhesive on there, so it's covering up all those little ones in the middle that you see. But I'm using E6000. This is kind of a good all-purpose adhesive, and I'm not putting a ton of it. I'm just putting blops, just little dollops here and there. The idea being if a string goes bad for whatever reason, I'll still be able to cut its wires and then yank it out and be able to replace it with a good one. So now that I've got the adhesive on there with the tape still attached, keeps everything in place, I just get everything lined up. So the temporary adhesive that was already on there is going to stick it on and keep it there while the E6000 cures. A lot of times I'll use hot glue in these scenarios, so I'll put the really good adhesive on there, the stuff that takes a long time to dry. So again, here's the frosted glass spray paint on the inside. So they also make film that you can put on there that will cover it up, but this was just kind of a quick and easy way of doing it. So you just spray on the frosted glass stuff and it does just what you would think it would. It frosts the glass. Here's a little bit more testing. on the lights. Again, every step of the way you test it, just so one, you get an idea of what it's going to look like, but two, just to make sure you didn't break anything. So I'm using right here, this is outdoor solid core Cat 5e. I have a bunch of this stuff. So I put a couple of zip ties on here for strain relief so that the cable won't be tugged and pull loose of anything. Then I take the Cat 5 and I twist it together with the stranded Cat 5 that's in there, and then I just use these solderless crimp connectors, twist it on really good, squeeze them nice and tight. And you know what I'm going to do next? I'm going to attach the lid. It's just screws in all four corners and then 2 on either side. And then I'll test again. I don't know that I show it here, but I do test again. So this is the tailgate of the Jeep. You just kind of pop that little vent off, and then inside lives the connector for the third brake light. They're there by default. So I use a piece of that wire again, and I fish it through. And I'm using this guy to ultimately feed the wire back through. Her Jeep is dirty. A couple of bolts just to hold this guy in place. Then I start feeding the cable through. Tape it on nice and tight to the wire. You just feed it through. Remember, it's always easier to cut more off than add more on, so make your wire too long. Put a little extra silicone in there just to help seal up the hole. And then feed it in place. Get ready to attach the bracket. I have a couple of galvanized washers here, 2 of them. That's all I needed to bridge the gap. This stuff's kind of hard to do one-handed, but you get it on there tight enough, and then you ratchet these jokers down. Last, I'm taking the solderless crimp connectors. That one's actually insulated. It's got the plastic coating around it. This one isn't. I couldn't fit both of them in there. I could have put a tap on the wire, but I was being lazy. So this way you can actually just tighten these guys up a little bit and then shove them onto the connector, and it makes a solid connection. It's in there, and then you just tuck it away and secure it. And that's that. That is the custom third brake light for a Jeep, and this one is the Jeep Wave. If you guys have any questions or comments, pop them down below. If you thought it was interesting, let me know about it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time, guys. Bye.